So we all know that emergency preparedness is awesome and necessary, but how do we make it mainstream? Let's talk about it and get some coffee. Coffee is literally my favorite thing. And we're gonna have a coffee chat and talk about making emergency preparedness mainstream. If you're watching this channel, it's because you're interested in being prepared for future emergencies and disasters, and you understand just how close we are to constant disaster, whether it's from global climate change and more intense weathers, whether it's from global supply lines that are much more fragile than we realized, whether it's from future pandemics or human-made problems. We have a whole bunch of things that could possibly go wrong. So you're here, you're ready to prepare. Maybe you have your 1 month of food storage. Maybe you have your med kit in order. Maybe you have an evacuation bag and a go bag plan. You know it's awesome, you know it gives you peace of mind, you know you feel better, but how do you bring up the conversation with your family and friends who look at you like maybe you've lost your mind? I just realized I had my glasses on. Nobody needs to see that. This is a conversation I want to have with our community and how we make emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness, prepping mainstream. Recently, I had some great conversations on a live stream with the Urban Prepper and Cascadia Dispatch and Sutton's Days, and we were talking about how for our parents and grandparents, prepping was actually just like regular survival. My dad, bless his soul, is going to be 80 in December of 2023, and he grew up in rural Minnesota where the mail was still delivered by sleigh when it snowed. They always had a month's supply or more of food, particularly in winter, because you had to, like, you could get snowed in. That wasn't seen as unusual. Most families had a garden unless you lived in town, and then your grandparents had a garden. Most people hunted or knew someone who hunted. And so you always were supplementing. But this was a rural way of life, and it was just considered normal. As we moved into cities, as convenience foods took over, as more people had access to refrigeration, and as we were encouraged to have more leisure time and to spend our time doing leisure activities and not doing things like home food preservation, raising our own food, doing other DIY skills, right? We were encouraged to spend our time and our money on leisure activities. A lot of these things that were considered everyday and normal for our parents and grandparents, maybe great-grandparents, were no longer considered necessary. It was progress. Now listen, I'm gonna be the first person to say, I like technological progress. I do not wanna have to wash my clothes by hand. No, thank you. I don't wanna have to wash my dishes by hand. No, thank you. I appreciate technology, but there are limits. But in progressing to a system in which we can rely on supply lines and just-in-time delivery, we've now gotten to a place where we've lost habits and skills that served our past generations. And so prepping in some element is really just living in a lifestyle of uncertainty. It's recognizing that things aren't as secure and planning ahead. That's what our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, and all of our forebears would have done. Now that in and of itself isn't radical, and you could probably have that conversation, particularly, in the post-pandemic world in which we recognize things can happen. You could probably say, listen, I'm gonna have a really nice stocked pantry because I don't trust we might not have another situation again. I never wanna run out of toilet paper. And you can make a joke about it and people can understand where you're coming from, and maybe you can begin some of that pantry level preparedness conversations. But what about like legit prepping? What about things like building the go bag, having the evacuation kit, having 3 months of dedicated food storage? The idea of having a bunker, this idea of having a year of food, this idea of having things like gas masks and full like surgical level first aid kits really didn't exist until the 60s and 70s as the threat of nuclear annihilation began to really weigh on people. I have done a little bit of research. As you see this rise in threat of nuclear attack, you also see this rise in threat of this idea of preparedness becoming the preppers. And they seem to coincide a little bit with the rise of the Back to Land movement, which is the first major homestead movement in the United States after like the actual homesteaders. So this is modern homesteaders. In the late 60s into the 70s, this like back to the land movement is where a lot of leftist hippies were trying to get back to the land and live a more simple lifestyle. We see prepping as a similar response to the kind of pervading societal fear of nuclear annihilation. Okay, so like none of your friends want to talk about nuclear annihilation, and maybe you don't want to talk about nuclear annihilation. How do we have a major conversation and make prepping a part of the mainstream without making it fear-based and doom and gloom? Y'all know that I am here to like not do the doomer thing. So how do we have the conversation? How do we bring it to everyone? I want 1 million families in the United States to have 1 month of preparedness. Like that is my overarching goal. I want 1 million millennials in particular to be prepared for future disasters. But how do you bring it up? Well, one of the things I think is to talk about climate change. Most millennials do believe in the science that climate change that is caused by humans is a thing and it's coming and we're getting ready to hit this like cliff of no return. And so talking about what are you doing to prepare for those more intense storms? What are you doing to prepare for those supply lines that are fragile because of climate change is totally a way to have that conversation. It doesn't have to come from a place of fear, though there's a lot of climate anxiety, but it can be an inroads with your friends and your family, your coworkers, your neighbors, to start saying, well, do you have like a disaster kit? Do you have a storm kit? And to make it less threatening and to make it more common sense. So I think totally broaching it in those terms is one way we can bring the prepping conversation into the mainstream. By the way, hi, if you're new here, I'm Brecky and this is Sustainable Prepping, where we teach empowerment through preparedness. This is a channel dedicated to emergency preparedness education to empower you to stay calm and confident in a crisis. And if you're enjoying this video, I'd love it if you smash the like button and shared it with a friend. Thanks. Another way that I think we can begin to make prepping mainstream is to start just baking it into how we live life and doing it for others until they start to realize why it's important. What that looks like, and I know that sounded very vague, is I have this dream of creating like really beautiful, lovely gift boxes that are all prepper stuff, but like instead of being macho, masculine, and camo, which is it turns off a lot of women, for example, and like non-hyper masculine individuals, to do like really lovely, almost luxury, like very beautifully packaged boxes where you can give someone the gift of preparedness. If I had $1 million to start a business, this is what I would do. But to think about it, like if you buy a house or you move into a new apartment or you start a new job or you want to celebrate with someone, you have like a housewarming gift or a celebration gift, instead of like a bottle of wine, like a $25 bottle of wine, which would be a nice gift, in my opinion, I think that you could spend that $25 and get a couple of really nice like lamps. Get a couple of wonderful battery/solar powered lamps to light it up and say, hey, listen, these are going to give you light. Here is a gift to illuminate your darkness. Oh man, I should package that. Here's a gift to illuminate your darkness, and you have some really beautiful camp lamps. Here is a really nice water filter because I want to give you the gift of life, right? Water is life. Here's a gift of life. Or like, what if you put together a really lovely box of like freeze-dried food and it was a Christmas present or a Hanukkah present or a holiday gift? I'm just thinking of ways that we could turn our gift giving into giving the gift of preparedness and make that a part of like our preparedness education that's low-key, that's non-threatening, but brings it into the mainstream. What do you think? Come down below and let me know what your ideas are around this, because again, if I had $1 million and could start a company, I would totally do that. I think a lot of people's fear is doing it wrong and then feeling overwhelmed and what do I actually need? And if we could turn preparedness into a part of our gift giving and our conversations, man. So what would you do if you were giving a gift of preparedness to someone who's not a prepper yet? What would you give them? I'd love to know. The last way I think that we can bring prepping and like emergency preparedness into our mainstream is to start baking it into other things. So if we teach home ec in schools, there should be a unit on emergency preparedness. We should have it as a part of like, if you're in scouting, you do a whole emergency preparedness unit. The government is trying because there is National Preparedness Month, and actually if you go to ready.gov, there's quite a few resources that are good, but like how many people know about them? So I think figuring out a way to just make it a non-threatening, proactive campaign and to put the onus on the individual, like you're responsible for yourself, but also support local communities that are doing it. Support local municipalities, local county governments. Get people excited at that level and just say, listen, these are gonna happen. So instead of being fist fighting in the Walmart for the last flat of water bottles, you can stay secure at home because you already have your preps. I feel like it's just a packaging and messaging issue that is preventing a lot of people from getting involved. What do you think? Do you have ideas for bringing prepping to the mainstream? I want to make it mainstream. I want to make it normal for people to have at least a 1-month supply of all their essentials. And yes, I think 3 months is really the gold standard, but if everybody in America that had the means had a month supply of everything they needed and could just stay home in the event of a major crisis, we'd be so much better off. 1 million millennials for a month of preps. That rhymes. That's an alliteration. I just thought of that. 1 million millennials for a month of preps. Let's see if we can do that. Friends, thank you for watching this video. If you want to continue your preparedness journey, I'll have a video right here for you. And until the next video, y'all, happy prepping.